problem. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jordan Naidu. I'm the Acting Director at the International Institute for Education Planning, the UNESCO Institute in Paris. I think in this session, I will get to introduce each of our panelists and our expert intervention. But basically, we are looking at the impact of COVID-19 on Africa's educational systems, focusing on two main questions. And together, the panel will approach those questions, even though each panelist has a specific question which they will respond to. The two issues we will look at is one broad question on how COVID-19 has impacted access, relevance, and quality education, especially for the most disadvantaged. This includes internally displaced populations, refugees, and other vulnerable children. The second is to move from just presenting the impact to look at some strategies and solutions that were used by the countries to try to cope with the challenges that the pandemic generated. And so these would be both traditional means to address it, but in particular, many countries, as you know, for the first time for some of them, use technological solutions, either adopting hybrid learning or even distance learning through mobile technology and a variety of other means. So I think the main focus for most was to ensure some kind of continuity of learning. The extent to which that was achieved varied across the country. Honest about that. So in a way, part of the lessons is that technology offered some solutions. It really filled a gap, but it was not a silver bullet solution. We had to also do many other things to accompany that. And I think this is, in a way, a great lesson for going forward, because even if we don't have crises, which unfortunately for our continent, we're constantly faced with all sorts of crises. The issue is all systems will be adopting and using technology in many new ways. And so the COVID pandemic offers us many lessons for even so-called regular contexts and regular circumstances, which therefore, in a way, it's an opportunity to draw on the lessons of the pandemic and how we adapted to regular adaptation that will be necessary as we look at the evolving systems and the fast pace of change. Regardless of the pandemic, every system in some form would need to adopt new ways of learning, including blended learning, hybrid forms, and so on. So I think and what was important was that the solutions that were used were at all levels. Solutions were adopted even at early childhood, basic education, and through to higher education. And in some ways, we were learning from across subsectors, because for some countries, already some of the solutions that were applied were regular already in the system, in some higher education institutions and so on. So another kind of, I think, unintended consequence, but in this time a positive consequence, is that we were learning across subsectors. And this is not common for education. So I think this is also, for me, a positive. I think I will stop there. And perhaps and I want to apologize to the panelists. Some of our panelists have provided bios, and all of them are very distinguished participants. I'm just going to introduce them by name and institution, and I hope they will bear with me for that. I don't know if the tech people there can help. This mic is stuck in some ways. So we have as our expert speaker, standing in for Dr. Maimouna Sissoko Toure, who was the coordinator of the KICS 21 Hub for Francophone Africa as part of the International Organization of La Francophonie. So our first speaker is Mr. Kelem, and please go ahead. And I will introduce the other speakers as I call on you to address our participants here this afternoon.
Merci, monsieur le modérateur. Je m'appelle Serge Chelem du Burkina Faso. Alors, je prends la parole pour intervenir au nom de Madame Sissoko Touré, qui est la coordonnatrice régionale du centre KIX Afrique 21. Alors, KIX, c'est quoi? C'est Knowledge Innovation Exchange. C'est le partage des connaissances, des innovations, c'est le partage des bonnes pratiques, c'est le partage des initiatives locales, c'est également le partage des connaissances et des solutions qui permettent à chaque pays, de pouvoir, en tout cas, faire face à ces défis locaux. Le programme KIX est une initiative du partenariat mondial pour l'éducation et ce programme est mis en œuvre, est coordonné par le Centre de recherche pour le développement international, la CRDI, et KIX Afrique 21 est mis en œuvre par un consortium d'ONG et d'agences. Il s'agit de l'Agence universitaire de la francophonie. Il y a la conférence des ministres de l'éducation des États et gouvernements membres de la francophonie. Et il y a l'OIF à travers l'IFEF, qui est l'Institut de la francophonie pour l'éducation et la formation. KIX regroupe près d'une soixantaine de pays à faible revenu ou à revenu intermédiaire dans le but de déterminer les défis stratégiques communs à ces pays, de promouvoir et de faciliter en tout cas la connaissance et le partage des innovations, des bonnes pratiques et l'accumulation des données probantes. KIX a également pour but de constituer en tout cas un réseau national pour le partage des connaissances et des innovations fonctionnelles et ouvert aux autres membres du programme KIX. Alors, pour la mise en œuvre du programme, il y a 4 centres régionaux qui sont créés. Vous avez le KIX Afrique 21, qui est composé de 21 pays d'Afrique centrale et occidentale, dont mon pays, le Burkina Faso. Il y a le centre régional KIX Afrique 19, qui est composé des pays de l'Afrique australe et orientale. Le centre KIX Europe, Asie, Pacifique, qui est composé de 20 pays également de l'Europe orientale, de l'Afrique du Nord, de l'Asie centrale et de l'Asie Pacifique. Et enfin, vous avez KIX Afrique, Amérique latine et des Caraïbes, qui est composé également de 10 pays de l'Amérique latine et des Caraïbes. Alors, la mise en place de ces différents centres régionaux doit permettre aux différents pays membres de partager des connaissances, de partager des initiatives locales qui vont permettre de relever les défis de l'éducation. Alors, quels sont ces défis? Il faut dire qu'il y a une étude récente qui a été commanditée par KIX Afrique 21 qui porte sur l'identification des priorités communes aux 21 pays partenaires membres du PME. Et il y a 4 thématiques clés qui ont été identifiées. Il s'agit de la qualité des apprentissages, vous avez la formation initiale continue des enseignants, vous avez l'alphabétisation et vous avez l'équité et l'inclusion. Voilà les 4 thématiques ou les 4 défis qui sont communs aux 21 pays du programme KIX. Alors, face à cela, il est mis en place dans chaque pays une équipe de coordination nationale pour pouvoir mettre en œuvre le programme dans chaque pays. Alors, l'équipe nationale est composée des membres du gouvernement, des responsables des ministères et des membres de la société civile. Alors, l'OIF, à travers l'IFEF, met à la disposition de chaque pays une subvention sous forme de protocole d'accord pour pouvoir mettre en œuvre le programme KIX. Alors, donc, aussi, il y est prévu des renforcements des capacités des équipes de coordination nationale à travers des rencontres organisées par l'OIF et qui permet aux différents pays de partager vraiment leurs expériences en matière d'innovation et de connaissances. Et aussi, tout dernièrement, ce fut en Éthiopie, du 4 au 6 octobre, il a été organisé un symposium continental sur les résultats de la recherche qui a regroupé un partenaire d'anciens chercheurs et universitaires et les points focaux du GPE et aussi des responsables des ministères. Et cela a été l'occasion pour les chercheurs de partager les résultats de leurs recherches, les articles de leurs recherches entre eux, afin de permettre au pays d'identifier quelles sont les bonnes pratiques mises en œuvre dans tel pays et qui pourraient contribuer aussi à aider l'autre pour relever ces défis. Donc, le symposium visait à apporter une visibilité, en tout cas accrue à la recherche, aux innovations et bonnes pratiques nationales et émergentes, pour améliorer surtout les résultats des apprentissages des élèves en Afrique subsaharienne. Le symposium visait également à promouvoir l'utilisation des résultats de la recherche pour impacter les politiques et les stratégies d'éducation et renforcer également les données de base probantes des centres en matière de recherche et de connaissances. Au Burkina Faso, le programme KIX a été bien lancé. Nous avons en tout cas pu identifier des bonnes pratiques sur la base d'un lancement d'appel à communication et 11 innovations ont été retenues. Et les différentes innovations permettent de relever les défis de l'accès, de la qualité, du pilotage et des pratiques pédagogiques. Nous avons pu boucler en tout cas le programme et nous remercions vraiment l'OIF et l'IFEF pour en tout cas l'accompagnement de notre pays dans la mise en œuvre de ce programme. Voilà un peu le contenu que je voulais partager au nom de la responsable du centre régional KIX que je représente actuellement. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Serge, for being very concise in your presentation. We will move on to the next speaker, who is Mr. Idrissa Dia, the Acting Director, Economic and Social Infrastructure Department, Islamic Development Bank. And so, Mr. Dia, the question that the organizers have posed for you is, what have been the most effective solutions and technologies that contributed or sustained learning continuity, both with regard to teachers as well as learners at different levels? You can choose to cover all levels, or in the interest of time, whichever ones you want to focus, and then perhaps we can have more time later. But before we go on, I just want to also acknowledge Her Excellency, the Honorable Minister, Madam Cole from the Gambia. And I hope you will have an opportunity to also share the experience from Gambia when we are in the discussion session. And thank you for joining us this afternoon. Over to you, Mr. Dia.
Thank you, Dr. Naido, and greetings to all the honorable attendees. You see, from the heavy impact that was unexpected, of course, when COVID has hit, I think that at the beginning we were all a bit caught off guard, the systems not being fully ready to cope with pandemics of such magnitude. And here, I think our role as Development Bank to help cope with that has been mostly on two dimensions. One is, of course, advisory, to help our member countries, of course, share some of the practices that have been relevant to other types of disruptions that happened in the past, and try to triangulate the good learnings that came from there and help them adapt in the short term their response to the problem. A response that has been in the beginning, as we all witnessed, mostly focused on providing learning continuity based on technological solutions. Some countries, and all countries, had their different way of innovating in that regard, since they were not prepared. Some went on to radio and TV type of massive courses that could touch a complete cohort of learners at some levels of learning. And the others that were a bit more prepared were able to deploy distance learning based on ICT solutions. But here again, as you could have witnessed, the different level of preparedness and equipment of countries made the complete difference. And as a development bank that works to ensure that, as the motto of the SDGs is saying, nobody should be left behind, our role was to advise and support in trying to bring some level of, I would say, equity in access by trying to democratize the access to learning and improve its continuity by a rapid deployment of resources that would have enabled some of the countries and some orders of learning to be equipped with the minimum that would ensure that the learners could continue to learn. Support the development of ICT infrastructure to ensure the connectivity also, that even those who had the equipment should be able to have access to a solid broadband that would enable them to have proper a level of access and contribution, the same way we did ourselves in our. So promoting best practices, using our leverage as an MDB present in 4 continents to reinforce the opportunities for some countries to learn from the others. Second, support deployment of light equipment that would allow in areas that were most in need to align and give minimum continuity to grow, and enhance the projects we had already in terms of ICT and telecommunication to allow also that continuity to happen. But that's the short term, obviously. And as a development finance institution, our focus, we believe, should be mostly on the long term in preparing the countries to avert or adapt and be more agile in facing such situations when they occur. And we unfortunately foresee that disruptions of this type might happen in the future. See today what has happened in countries like Pakistan with the flooding linked to climate change. In other countries, it's Ebola today hitting. So now our focus is past the immediate efforts to cope with the crisis, to build the tools that will ensure sustainable resilience, if I may say so, by stronger preparedness, higher level of equipment, but also investing in retraining the teachers so that, because they were also caught off guard and not ready for non-face-to-face type of learning that Africa education system has inbuilt and has a privileged way of operating, to teach the teachers, to train the teachers on how to be also able to operate remotely and be able to ensure continuity. So that's our aim now, that's our area of focus in strengthening the capacity of the country and investing more heavily on ICT and digital inclusion to reduce the gap between the have and the have-not, the rural versus the urban, and between countries, those that are more wealthy and those that are less wealthy. Time is short, but I think I will stop there for the time being.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dia. That's been very helpful, and we can always come back to you for additional inputs later if we have more time. The next speaker is Dr. Professor Raisa Malu, the Director, Investing People, ASBL from the Democratic Republic of Congo. So over to you, Professor. And again, I think it's the same question that I posed to Mr. Dia, and I can repeat: what have been the most effective solutions and technologies that contributed or sustained continuity of learning during this period, focusing both or either on teachers or learners at any level?
Merci. Pour répondre à cette question, je propose de vous partager l'expérience de la République démocratique du Congo. Donc en RDC, je veux commencer par le contexte général. Donc nous avons adopté une stratégie sectorielle de l'éducation et de la formation pour la période 2016-2025 avec 3 piliers, donc l'accès, la qualité et la gouvernance. Et dans cette stratégie, il y a plusieurs réformes qui ont été prévues, dont la réforme de l'enseignement des disciplines STEM, on va dire des sciences et des mathématiques, pour le secondaire, dont j'ai eu la charge pour notre ministère de l'enseignement primaire, secondaire et technique. Alors, dans le cas de cette réforme, ce que nous avons fait, c'est procéder en fait à la modernisation de nos programmes, notamment de mathématiques. Et ce que nous avons voulu, c'est utiliser un logiciel, MathWiz, développé par une société anglaise, Wiz Education, pour nous permettre d'évaluer en fait si nos enseignants sont bien en train d'appliquer les nouveaux programmes que nous avons mis en place et si ces programmes permettent effectivement une amélioration des connaissances et des compétences de nos élèves au niveau du secondaire, en sachant que l'on a commencé par les 2 dernières années de l'éducation de base. L'éducation de base en RDC est sur 8 ans, qui comprend les 6 années du primaire avec les 2 premières années du secondaire. Alors, au moment du test pilote de ce logiciel MathWiz, c'est quand la pandémie a frappé et que donc on a dû fermer les écoles. Alors, ça a été en fait, plutôt que d'être un problème, ça a été une opportunité. Parce que donc ce logiciel est un tuteur virtuel qui est doté d'une intelligence artificielle. Le but était d'évaluer le niveau des élèves de manière à leur apporter soit de les faire revenir en arrière pour qu'ils puissent acquérir les connaissances et les compétences qui n'étaient pas acquises, ou de les faire avancer. Mais pour commencer le programme, il a d'abord fallu évaluer le niveau de nos élèves, tout comme de nos enseignants. Et on s'est rendu compte, avant même que l'on ferme les écoles, que nos élèves de la 7e année de l'éducation de base accusaient un retard en moyenne de 3 années, ce que l'on peut considérer comme leur âge mathématique. Donc, ce qu'ils étaient supposés savoir au moment, au niveau de la 7e année de l'éducation de base. Et l'évaluation des enseignants a indiqué qu'ils avaient aussi un retard d'équivalent 2 années et demie sur les connaissances qui sont supposées enseigner à nos enfants. Et donc là, c'est déjà avant Covid. Puis donc, on a cette fermeture des écoles et on s'est rendu compte en fait que cet outil, ce logiciel, ce tuteur virtuel d'intelligence artificielle, pouvait être utilisé dans ce moment de fermeture des écoles pour permettre en fait que les apprentissages puissent continuer, pour en tout cas cette population pilote qui avait été choisie, puisse continuer à la maison. Alors évidemment, nous avons eu ce challenge qui était, nous on avait équipé des écoles en termes d'ordinateurs et de tablettes dans le cas parfait où nos écoles étaient ouvertes. Maintenant que les écoles étaient fermées, les enfants étaient rentrés à la maison, mais on a pu voir qu'en mobilisant les communautés locales, les enseignants et les parents ont pu se prêter les tablettes ou les téléphones portables pour que le test du logiciel MathWiz continue et que l'on ait donc pour cette cohorte pilote, que l'on ait une continuité des apprentissages des élèves. Parce qu'en utilisant une fois par semaine le logiciel, on a vu que les enfants pouvaient récupérer plus vite le retard qu'ils avaient déjà avant même la fermeture de l'école. Ce qu'on a aussi vu avec cette fermeture, c'est que autant avant, ce n'était pas imaginable pour nos enseignants d'avoir une formation à distance ou un apprentissage à distance. Ici, on a réussi à mobiliser les enseignants que pour que leur formation continue de se faire à distance avec un outil simple comme WhatsApp, par exemple, où ils pouvaient se prêter leur téléphone et continuer les apprentissages à distance. Et ils nous ont, à la fin de la formation, qui en fait a eu lieu au bout de 3 mois, donc durant toute la fermeture due à Covid, puis quand on a réouvert les écoles, ils ont tous fait comme évaluation que cet exercice qui leur a été imposé du fait de la fermeture des écoles suite à la pandémie leur a permis d'acquérir déjà des meilleures compétences simplement pédagogiques, parce qu'ils avaient effectivement du retard sur leur maîtrise des mathématiques qu'ils étaient supposés enseigner à nos élèves de 7e année de l'éducation de base, mais également leur a permis de développer ces compétences dans le numérique qui leur manquait, et d'intégrer le numérique dans leur enseignement, parce que ça a été l'objet de la formation que l'on a fait avec eux, parce que ce que l'on veut, c'est arriver à ce que le logiciel MathWiz soit en fait utilisé normalement dans le cursus normal de l'enseignant. Donc cet événement malheureux, finalement, s'est retrouvé être une belle opportunité et nous a permis de montrer que l'on peut effectivement utiliser ces technologies, comme ici cette intelligence artificielle, pour récupérer le retard qu'il y a au niveau des élèves, mais également au niveau des enseignants. Alors évidemment, la RDC a aussi développé, comme tout le monde, des vidéos et des podcasts. Là aussi, cet exercice nous a permis de voir ce qui marche et ce qui ne marche pas. Par exemple, une vidéo de 50 minutes où on voit un enseignant devant le tableau. Alors, si on se contente simplement de filmer une situation comme une classe normale, ça ne fonctionne pas pour l'enseignement à distance, pas aussi bien. Et donc, ce qu'on a choisi en RDC, c'est de développer des vidéos qui seraient plus courtes, de 10 à 15 minutes, focalisées sur des concepts pour permettre un apprentissage qui soit ciblé et en utilisant toutes les opportunités du numérique et des possibilités que nous offre en fait le numérique. Et donc, c'est le programme Apprendre à la maison qui a été mis en place. Alors évidemment, quand on avait ces vidéos, on les faisait passer à la télévision nationale, mais vous savez bien, dans nos pays, tout le monde n'a pas accès à la télévision nationale. On le faisait passer sur YouTube, on a encore moins accès à YouTube. Et donc, on se posait la question de savoir comment va-t-on permettre à ce que les populations qui sont dans des régions les plus reculées puissent avoir accès à ces vidéos. Et c'est là l'enseignement supplémentaire de la pandémie, de cette crise de la pandémie, c'est de l'importance de travailler en fait avec des acteurs locaux et des acteurs qui ne sont pas forcément dans le système éducatif. Et donc là, on a pu, et je vous raconte une anecdote, par exemple à l'est du pays, la RDC en général on la connaît bien, surtout l'est, Goma et à l'est du pays, en discutant avec des jeunes d'une start-up, ils nous ont indiqué que c'était pratique courante que les populations locales en fait se partagent des chansons via des cartes SSD. Mais ça, le ministère ne le savait pas. Et donc c'est en discutant avec des start-up privées et des associations qu'on s'est rendu compte en fait des habitudes des populations locales. Et donc on a mis à disposition l'ensemble de nos vidéos à ces associations qui les mettaient sur les cartes SSD et qui pouvaient donc le partager avec les populations locales. Donc la technique au niveau du ministère, enfin, la stratégie qui a été mise, c'est d'impliquer les communautés, de développer un réseau communautaire pour faciliter le partage des vidéos et des podcasts qui ont été développés au niveau du ministère, et chaque fois de manière courte, en allant à l'essentiel sur des concepts plutôt que d'avoir une longue vidéo de 50 minutes. Et c'est déjà difficile en classe de pouvoir maintenir 50 minutes nos élèves en attention, alors imaginez avec une vidéo, cela fonctionne encore moins. Et donc on a été sur des vidéos plus fun, mais qui allaient évidemment à l'essentiel pour pouvoir maîtriser les concepts, en réduisant en termes de savoir essentiel, parce que ça a été le sens de la réforme des programmes au sein de la RDC, ça a été vraiment de réduire les programmes et de définir ce qui était essentiel à apprendre pour les domaines des sciences et des mathématiques, et de développer un réseau communautaire pour ce partage de vidéos et de podcasts. Alors évidemment, on a fait aussi des carnets d'apprentissage. Donc ici, ce que je voudrais en fait... ce sur quoi je voudrais insister, ce que nous a appris l'expérience de la RDC, c'est que les solutions que l'on a pu mettre en place en fait, pour permettre la continuité des apprentissages, il faut que ce soit idéalement un mixte de solutions. Il n'y a pas une seule solution qui fonctionne. Il faut un mix de solutions qui permettent la continuité des apprentissages. Ces solutions doivent être accompagnées d'une méthode d'évaluation, parce qu'évidemment, on envoyait nos vidéos, mais qu'est-ce qui prouvait que non seulement l'enseignant ou l'élève avait suivi la vidéo, et qu'effectivement, il y avait une amélioration de ses compétences, une amélioration des apprentissages. Et donc, ça, c'est l'intérêt du logiciel Matwiz en l'occurrence, mais il faut maintenant le généraliser. Mais donc, les solutions que l'on met en place doivent être accompagnées d'une méthode d'évaluation pour qu'on soit sûr qu'il y a bien des apprentissages qui sont acquis en suivant les différentes méthodes. Il est important d'agir, et on l'a encore vu, sur la formation des enseignants. Et on a vu que les enseignants, avant Covid, évidemment, étaient réfractaires à cette idée de l'enseignement à distance, aussi parce qu'il y a une question d'équité. Après tout, tout le monde n'avait pas accès aux mêmes outils, mais ils étaient réfractaires parce que pour eux, c'était pas courant, c'était pas normal pour eux de passer par un outil, une technologie. Et donc là, ici, comme ils ont été obligés de le faire, Ils ont vu l'intérêt de l'apprentissage et ils sont devenus extrêmement demandeurs d'avoir des formations où on intègre le numérique dans l'enseignement des disciplines, ici pour l'enseignement des disciplines STEM, donc les sciences et les mathématiques. Et les solutions qui sont mises en place doivent permettre également un monitoring des progrès pour améliorer aussi la gouvernance du système. Ça a été beaucoup rappelé ici ces 2 derniers jours, mais évidemment, et on insiste là-dessus, c'est vraiment sur la donnée. Ici, quand on a fait l'évaluation des élèves et l'évaluation des enseignants, on a tous été choqués du retard que et nos élèves et nos enseignants accumulaient en termes de connaissances pour le niveau où ils étaient. Et ça, c'était avant la pandémie. Alors après la pandémie, il faudrait le retard, on peut s'imaginer, c'est creusé. Et donc l'idée, c'est d'avoir des outils qui permettent d'accélérer, en tout cas de faire une remédiation. Mais donc le monitoring du progrès permet donc une gestion, une gouvernance basée sur les données, sur l'information est un aspect essentiel. Donc un mix de solutions qui permet les apprentissages, qui permet l'évaluation, qui permet la formation de nos enseignants et qui permet de monitorer les progrès et d'améliorer la gouvernance. Et la dernière chose sur laquelle je voudrais insister, et c'était vraiment notre expérience en RDC, c'est vraiment de travailler avec des acteurs qu'à la limite on n'a pas l'habitude d'avoir dans notre système, notamment toutes les start-up, les jeunes start-up numériques qu'il y a dans le pays, que l'on n'a pas l'habitude d'intégrer à l'intérieur. Et donc, voilà ce sur quoi j'aurais voulu terminer. Merci.
Thank you very much for that. We had quite a detailed reflection from one case in Africa. Now we shift gears a little, so to move to Mr. Jaakko Vuorio, who is the coordinator, Finnish National Agency for Education, Finland, on a national distance learning programs in response to COVID-19. And so over to Jaakko Vuorio for his presentation. I think this is, and it's on the same question, looking at the response, the kind of solutions used, and so on. And we'll have a good perspective of comparing how different countries in completely different contexts facing the same challenges, how they've adapted. So over to you, Jaakko.
Thank you, Dr. I'm going to jump right to it because the time is limited. So, first of all, I'm going to present a few surveys and key findings from these surveys, as you can see from the screen. So, the first one is our agency's own survey from Finnish national reports, and it was published on April 21, and another case report is published on August 22 together with UNESCO. So I'm going to start with a short description on how our ministry and the agency handled the COVID-19 crisis to education during the time period 2021, especially focusing on the vulnerable groups. So, timeline. In March 2020, the government decided that Finland would implement emergency conditions and that certain parts of the Emergency Powers Act would be activated, and measures to prevent the spread of coronavirus were communicated to providers of education at all levels, with a particular aim to safeguard early childhood care and education and ensure the completion of qualification and student admissions. So most schools closed in mid-March 2020 and reopened in May 2020 for 2 weeks until the end of the semester. And this was important for assessing the impact of the distance learning and preparing the necessary support measures for the forthcoming semester 2021. So during the distance learning period, face-to-face provision continued to be made available for most pupils in ECCE and primary grades 1 to 3, but with a strong recommendation for parents to keep children at home if possible. And the right to receive in-person teaching was also given to pupils who received the decision or ruling on special needs support. So the spread of the coronavirus was partly under control by late spring 2020, and there was a widespread social debate in Finland about opening schools due to concerns about the devastating negative effects of a prolonged distance learning on pupils and families. During the autumn term of 2020, primary and secondary schools and technical and vocational education and training returned to in-person teaching. So hybrid learning was used locally, meaning both in-person and distance learning methods were in use, yet ruled locally in different parts of Finland. And wide-scale distance learning and hybrid learning were soon covered by face-to-face learning in spring 2021. So the most effective solution and technologies, what we have witnessed and what we have talked through with UNESCO, according to a study conducted by Trade Union of Education in Finland, that is a union of teachers, the majority of pupils in basic education have digital devices, and 5 out of 6 teachers reported that students have a computer device they needed for learning. However, according to Finnish Education Evaluation Center, around 20% of education providers and teachers were concerned that the lack of internet connection and device endangered the equal treatment of students. And according to a report by Teacher Union, about 3 out of 4 teachers in basic education estimated that the objectives, contents, and working methods of the curriculum were compromised. So there's a lot of room for improvement. Due to their level of autonomy, teachers were quite flexible in choosing their own pedagogical methods, materials, and online learning platforms they used with their students. Commonly used tools were Moodle, Google Classroom, Microsoft Teams, Office tools, Skype, and Zoom. But the most common solutions during the distance learning for live pupil-to-teacher contact were traditional telephone connection, WhatsApp voice and video calls, also Microsoft Teams, Google Meet, and Google Hangouts. So teachers were advised to foster an active dialogue with caregivers to support the students that were learning at home. Teachers still need a lot of support in different fields regarding distance teaching, and these are softwares and open access learning content and how to use them, assessment and interaction in digital learning environments, how to build an engaging relationship with the students when you are not learning in the same physical environment, and student welfare and support mechanisms. And schools still need clear rules, norms, guidance, and shared practices. Also support for staff and learners that are experiencing stress, mental health issues, anxiety, and so on. So whatever the medium, whether a TV broadcast, radio, paper sheet, telephone, email, digital learning environment, the learning and education must continue. Digital learning environments offer certain benefits in creating and sustaining an engagement and motivation to education through live broadcast teaching and asynchronous access to education. Yet many examples show this can also be achieved by using multiple tools and methods, digital and analog. So in Finland there is one interesting thing. The government introduced a tutor-teacher model already in 2015, where every school has a specialist teacher that have been trained to peer, mentor, and train their colleagues how to use and foster ICT in education and how to use digital pedagogical methods in their teaching. We witnessed, and we've also surveyed tutor teachers in Finland, that their work was crucial during COVID-19, since in a matter of days they could provide flexible training and support for their teacher communities and share their insights through local, regional, and national tutor-teacher networks that work both in physical environments but also, for instance, in social media channels. A similar model was also used in Estonia, our neighboring country, and their experiences, as we've learned, has been quite similar. So instead of trying to teach every teacher how to make use ICT in education, one teacher per school or region can be an effective start for the transformation. I'm going now to some of the best practices which you may find from the UNESCO case report as well. UNESCO has compiled these notions together with our agency. The first one is e-readiness policies, that every country should consider how they create e-readiness policies in education that should always focus on equality and equity. Both teachers and students need to be given some sort of data packages or access to internet or some sort of local network to access online distance learning materials that ensure that all have access to online systems. Distance learning methodologies is something that we discuss quite a lot of in Finland, and about digital pedagogical methodologies, because teaching and learning in digital environments is quite different compared to traditional learning environments. Digital fluency should be mainstreamed in the curriculum to bolster the ICT literacy. Teachers should be provided with guidance and norms and shared practices how one school or region works together in a distance learning period, for instance. All live synchronous online sessions that we used quite a lot could be also recorded and made available through some sort of online learning management system to be used for every teacher or teacher communities. And learning management systems should streamline feedback and assessment by teachers so that individual email feedback to students does not increase the workload of teachers. Peer mentors, such as tutor teachers who are digitally literate in distance learning, could or should provide training sessions to teachers to enhance their skills in this area. And an increase in the use of distance learning may be considered for pupils who have neuropsychiatric difficulties and whose well-being and learning ability benefit from the decreased social and sensory loads. And this is something that we also witnessed, that some of the students actually learned better when they were at home. Administration and communication systems need to be accessible via online connections, irrespective of the location. And single communication channels should be used with caregivers, parents, to avoid overburdening those who have more than one child and who has, for instance, children that are in different age levels. And of course, technical support needs to be made available on an individual basis when remote learning starts unexpectedly. The additional staffing and technologies necessary for providing this must be considered and planned for, of course. I'm going to end my presentation here, and there's a lot of things that I didn't mention. Time is limited, but I strongly encourage you to introduce yourself to the UNESCO case report. It's wonderful, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Jaco. I think you can see from Jaco's presentation and Professor Raisa's presentation, even though we have such different contexts and there's much advanced systems, there are some very common elements as well, both in the methodologies, some of the best practices, but some of the challenges. And in a way, it builds off the other two presentations. We had some of the lessons for us in ensuring the infrastructure, investments and so on. But I will not say more because I think there are a number of interesting things which our participants here may want to pick up in the discussion. So now we shift gears a little to Margarita, focus list. We know each other for a long time, so I'm going to take advantage of that. So I'll hand over to Margarita from the Global Partnership for Education, who's going to give us a more global view in terms of Africa. And the question for Margarita is more from a broader perspective in terms of how to look at these, how can we better integrate the lessons coming out of the COVID experience into planning and support more generally.
Thank you very much, Jordan, and nice to be here and be part of this panel. We had a very unique perspective in GPE of how countries responded to COVID, because immediately when the COVID crisis hit, we were able to mobilize $500 million in grant funding to support countries. And the premise for getting this funding was that countries had to develop a single response plan that partners could align around. And this was it's very core to GPE's principle that if we're going to strengthen systems, we have to have a single plan that we all support and not lots of dispersed activities by partners. And this, of course, gave us a very unique insight into what happened and what different solutions that countries came up with, and we've heard some really good examples here, so I'm not going to repeat those. But the grants supported both what to do when schools are closed and the measures to ensure learning continuity, the preparations of schools for returning when schools open again, both in terms of providing sanitary facilities and soap and hand washing, but also in terms of campaigns to mobilize the students who were not likely to come back and really reach out and bring those students back to school. And then finally, the assessment of learning loss and remedial learning and so on. So we just saw so many activities. Around 60 countries got grants, and we were able to get insight into what 60 countries did across the globe. So when reflecting a little bit about what all this means in terms of moving ahead, I think that the first lesson is we have to expect shocks. We have to expect crisis, and education systems have to have contingency plans, not just at the center level, but the different actors throughout the system have to know what to do if there's a flood, if there's a pandemic, if there's a conflict. How do you, the stakeholders, the teachers in the schools, the school directors, the school districts, they have to know what to do. There have to be contingency plans, and ministries have to equip all these stakeholders with tools in order to respond when the crisis hits. Because when COVID did hit, and even though there were these centralized response plans, we saw, of course, that teachers weren't prepared for this. And the students and the families weren't prepared for this crisis. And so even though there were a lot of great things happening, the actual impact on children and schools was quite severe. So that offered us this opportunity to say, okay, so what do we need to do now so that next time this happens, the teachers are prepared, the schools are prepared, the families are prepared. And I think that requires several things. One is we need to look across sectors. You can't plan education in isolation. You have to have coordination between education, health, nutrition, infrastructure. I mean, we're talking about technology here. What can we do, what can countries do to build out the reach of technology to remote communities so that they can have more easily access the kinds of tools that we see more in urban areas? And then of course, I think one aspect is to look at all this infrastructure and the contingency plans. Another aspect is, and I'm very happy there's been a lot of talk about teachers today. What does a teacher need to know, and what tools does a teacher need to have to be able to continually respond to the needs of children on an ongoing basis, both in the classroom and under normal circumstances, and when things change and when they have to adapt to the situation. So really integrating into teachers, this empowering teachers, I would say, to be innovative on their own and to find solutions when things change, and to adapt and not wait for instructions from the central level, but say, okay, I need to reach these children, I need to continue to support. How can we develop this reflex in teachers to be adaptive as well? And I think that one of the really interesting things that has come out of the COVID crisis is all this assessment of learning loss and remedial education is actually something that's relevant on an ongoing basis, because it is an opportunity to instill a reflex among teachers and schools to continually assess whether children are learning and to continually adapt the education to the needs of children. So not assessing, just in terms of formal tests at the end of the school year, but really to keep an eye on whether children are learning. So that's a skill that I think it's not just for crisis, it's for normal times as well. And a lot of in some countries with what we found very interesting in their applications for this response was that they were already saying that, look, some of the things we're putting in place now, we can use to reach the children we haven't been able to reach all this time in the remote areas. We can actually use these methods that we've developed during this time in order to access those missing millions who aren't in the schools. So, so that's, you know, it's sort of, I think we're not just looking at crisis, it's more the continuity of responsiveness. And if we can have education systems that are more responsive and that really focus on empowering teachers, empowering communities, empowering the people who are actually delivering education to be able to be responsive, to be able to adapt, that requires the kind of skills that we also want to see children learning in schools. And to build the resilience of communities, of children, of families, of teachers. So it's really about, I think the reflection is really how do we build that resilience into throughout the system, and not just in an isolated sort of how do we teach remotely when there's a crisis. So thank you, John.
Thank you very much, Margareta. I think that was a good rounding up in a way of the inputs from all of our speakers, and I'm glad you picked up something that Mr. Dia mentioned in terms of resilience, because I think that's critical. And what was also, I think, a takeaway for me is the fact that you focus both on the systemic approach, both preparedness during a crisis and the follow-up. So that's extremely important. But at the same time, while we focus on the system and how the education system was affected, we should not forget the individual impact, because teachers were impacted, families were impacted, and children were impacted as individuals. You know, many communities lost parents, children, grandparents. So we had to look at both the human element and the system element. So I think that's really important. I have quite a few more things to say, but I will not say any more at this stage, and rather give our participants, our people in the audience, an opportunity. But just to add one final point, Jaco referred to the case study that UNESCO did, but I think a lot of the agencies, including UNESCO, UIS, UNICEF, the World Bank, OECD, produced a lot of documents. And one document I think that was really important was a joint effort which surveyed all ministries globally. Which is a reel called What's Next? Lessons on Education Recovery. So that is also important, because going forward, we know there has been learning loss, but not only learning loss, psychological impacts, the system has been under pressure. So we also really need a strategy, not only for, you know, everybody talks about building back better. I think for us, it's an opportunity to build anew. The minister from Uganda, I think, mentioned, you know, it's time to forget the past. You have to think something completely new, different. And I think that's a message for us as well. Although we shouldn't throw out the baby with the bathwater, but it is an opportunity to really think differently. So for me, that's a big, important lesson. And I want to reflect one last point. Over the 2 years of the pandemic, I was actually the UNESCO representative in Afghanistan. So we had a double challenge of facing an ongoing conflict and COVID. But it also showed us how could we use the pandemic experience, because that conflict is not ending. But it showed us other ways of reaching children who are excluded in a conflict situation. So for me, it was a real eye-opener. And I think that's important. So let me stop there. I see also, I acknowledged the minister from the Gambia earlier, but I also see we have a minister from Uganda, if I'm correct. So I'll give both the ministers the first opportunity for a comment or a question. And I leave it to you to decide who goes first. Do we have a mic back there?
Thank you very much, Jordan. Thank you very much, distinguished panelists. It was good to hear all of you speak. And while I was able to resonate with some of the things that you said, I was also able to learn some lessons. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're here, to hear from each other, learn from each other, and share experiences so that others could also learn from us. Yes, COVID. When it just happened, all of us, the whole world, was taken aback. But like I said, learning from each other, experience sharing. I'm somebody who listens to the radio a lot, and that is news. And during that time, when it just started, in Europe, of course, before getting to Africa, and the Gambia in particular, I was listening to the radio, and I heard about what was happening in other countries. While schools were closing, education was under serious threat. And one morning I was listening to the radio, and I heard in some parts of the world that schools had closed, and they were going to be using distant learning to replace the face-to-face. I think one thing also that COVID has taught us, not everything is bad about COVID. The deaths were bad, of course, but we've learned a lot of good lessons. And one thing that it has taught us is that for education, the classroom is not the only place where children can learn. The children can learn anywhere, everywhere, anytime. I'll come to that. So, when I heard that this was happening, I thought, yes, this is something we can do in case it gets to the Gambia. Fortunately for us, we had just launched an education TV channel that we thought we were going to use for teaching and learning. But in our current education policy as well, there was the statement that we will use ICT for teaching and learning. So I quickly thought of that and revisited the education policy. And the day that the president declared the closure of all educational institutions in the country, in March it was, because COVID had got into the Gambia. A day before that, or 2 days before, I had exchanged ideas, my thinking, with one of my officers. And that's someone here with me. And I said to him, come, one morning. This is what I heard. In case COVID gets here, this is what I think we should do. And he said, yes, it's a good idea. So we shared it with the permanent secretary. And 2 days after, schools were declared closed. That very night, the announcement was made on the news, 8 p.m. news, and that very night I called my peers. I said, have you heard? What are we going to do? Let's have a meeting tomorrow at the office. And he was also, honestly, very proactive. All of us were very proactive. And we had the meeting, and then we decided to invite stakeholders. And they came and were discussed. And we agreed that we were going to use we are going to do distant learning. We will use our education TV channel, and we will invite media houses. And yes, that's exactly what we did. They came and we strategized. And honestly, within 5 days of school closure in the Gambia, we were on air. And when we had the meeting, we said, now schools have closed, education cannot wait, we are taking the schools to the homes. And so that's what we did. Schools were declared closed on a particular Tuesday. The following Monday, the lessons were on air. And it was the TV channels that we had, and all the community radio stations, about 33 community radio stations, to make sure that we reach we reach all the children as possibly as we could. But again, talking about intersectoral collaboration, we needed data. And the data that we used, we did not keep in education. It was data collected by the Bureau of Statistics on integrated household survey to tell us how many households had TV sets, how many households had radio sets, how many households had television, mobile phones. And we saw that in the Greater Banjul area, the urban area, a lot of households had TVs. But in the rural areas, there were not so many. But they had over 90% access to radio. So we decided to use both the TV and the radio. And we had the offline networks that they also use offline and online to be able to stream these lessons. And that's how we did it. Yes, we've done that. But now, what's going to happen? We need to sustain. We've learned these lessons, that we can do things differently. We have rethought. It talks about rethinking education and reimagining education. We have thought about it. We have reimagined. How can we do things differently? I think that's what we must sustain now, is the sustainability. And I want to thank GPE through Dr. Margarita for the support that they gave us as a COVID response, and other partners, the Gambia Teachers Union, were also very helpful, because when we did a survey on how many children were having access to these lessons, we found out that there were a lot of households without even a radio set, not to talk about a television. So they came in and they provided radio sets to some households. And that's how we did it. And we're going to be sustaining these innovative strategies that we have used to address the face-to-face or the lack of schooling during COVID. We see how we could do things better.
Thank you very much, Minister. I think there's a very great input that reflects what the panel have been saying about not one size fits all, not a single solution, and working in an integrated way, which is a perfect reflection from the ground. So appreciate very much your intervention. Thank you, Minister. Over to you.
Thank you so much. My country, Uganda, has been one of the countries that was really hit. This education sector, we stayed closely almost 2 years. The schools remained closed. And I must say that COVID has brought two fundamental principles that we can think about. One, the first principle, it helped us to reflect where we have been as African countries in education sector, how far we have moved, and at the time of COVID, where are we? And it has helped us to redirect our purposes, our common purposes, and put a roadmap with a clear agenda. Redirecting our common purposes in order to get a sustainable, build a sustainable, resilient, and effective system that is workable for us, the African education sectors. The second principle that has come on board is that it has enabled us to look at education that we are talking about is a system that we are producing the learners to go out there, meet changing climate every day. These are learners coming to embrace the ever-changing technology in the world, learners coming to embrace job market that might be dynamic. So keep that in mind. I want to agree with the presenters. Really, this is the time for us to, all of us, to see how we can support our education system. Alone, we cannot do it. We did it together with the partners. We are grateful to GPE. We are grateful to all the partners, the support you have given. I just want to comment on one. Given what Margarita talked about, intersectoral approach of working together. COVID has taught us we were not prepared with school health policy. As Uganda, our school health policy has taken a long time. I believe many countries are like Uganda. We need the school health policy more than yesterday. This is a policy that is to help us how prepared a school is in terms of any outbreak, being it disease, being it floods, being it drought, being it nutrition problems. Now, this is the time for us to put in place strategies and policies of school health. Tomorrow, it might be influenza outbreak in school. It might be scabies breaking in schools. So that is what I thought, in collaboration with the Ministry of Health, with the Ministry of Environment, Water and Sanitation, we need to work using whole government approach. Now, for us in Uganda, our structure does not have a nurse. Our school looked at all teachers. We did not have the structure where we have a school nurse unless for private schools. So there is need for us to link the schools with nearby health facilities where there are nurses, such that we can have school-based surveillance system that is continuously, which is embedded in that school policy. A surveillance that the nurses can reach out to the nearby school and to be quick to detect any outbreak. A case in point is the Ebola we have in Uganda, and tomorrow it might be something different. So I want to agree with you that we don't need to work in isolation as education sector. We need to bring other ministries and other sectors such that we have a whole government approach or intersectoral approach. I'm the next panelist, so I do not want to talk too much. Thank you so much, and accept our sincere appreciation as people of Uganda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. I think this also emphasizes the whole need of a whole government approach, as you have said. And I think even during either one of the plenaries, somebody said we are always thinking about only how education can transform the world, but we also need the support of the entire sector to transform education. So it's really important that we have. Margarita spoke from the lessons from across the countries. You've given us a concrete example from Uganda, which I think everybody should learn from. So I'm glad you have shared the challenge, and I hope you are successful with being able to link the schools with the nearest health center, because that's critical. For learning cannot happen unless children are well fed and healthy. So I think that's critical. So thank you very much. So I think, I'm not sure, we weren't told, initially we were told we only have 45 minutes, and then they said you have to finish early. But if the rest of the participants will indulge us, we can stay for one or two more comments or questions. Otherwise, I'll go back to the panel. If somebody has a burning comment or question, I will take one. Otherwise, we will conclude. So we have one person. Let's give that person the opportunity.
Good afternoon. My name is Suraj Shah. I'm the lead for government engagement and strategic partnerships at MasterCard Foundation. Thank you so much for all the insights. This is something that we've been following at the Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning. We even had a smaller ministerial forum supported by ADEA in May before the e-learning Africa program. And the focus was on resilient education systems, what are the lessons we've learned, and where do we move from that. I wanted to say something, but I think the Minister of Gambia kind of spoke about it. Before, when everyone was hit with school closures and inevitable learning losses, what to do next. But do countries have sufficient data to understand where are our teachers? How well are they equipped? What's their capacity to do something that we will initiate a different model of learning? So first and foremost is there enough data in countries around education and skills that such decisions can be made? And I look forward to the session tomorrow around data. But having said that, I love the comparison between the two countries on what was done Finland's got what, 2 million learners? Compare that to Kenya, it's 25. So there's that, yeah, but are we ready to move into a hybrid model of learning? Is to be more resilient, somebody said, it could be political strife, it could be anything that closes schools. Can we continue learning? I'm not saying, and the model of a teacher present is very important to shape young minds. Technology is never going to take that away. But can we do a hybrid model of learning? For a few more reasons, and I think, Marguerite, you mentioned that there are tracks and tracks of learners in every country that actually don't make it to a physical school. Similarly, in Africa, girls drop out, especially at secondary school level. They drop out for inevitable reasons, and they never go back. Can these hybrid models ensure learning anytime, anywhere? And so, you know, are we all prepared to go that extra mile to do that? That's my question.
Thank you very much. I don't think we have time to respond to the question, but
That's okay.
But these are questions I think all of us will have to deal with as we go to reimagine, as the minister used the word, the education system. So I'm not going to do a summing up. I think a lot of good sharing of lessons, and it's still something we will continue to do, because we do know the crises never go away. But I just want to make a plug for the International Institute for Education Planning, where I'm at the moment. In response to your question, we are working a lot more on crisis-sensitive planning to ensure that resilience becomes a daily part of whatever plans we do. We cannot see this as a add-on. It should be normal. Any system that you're planning for, any policy, should actually have at its DNA the idea of building resilience. So for me, that is really important. And we won't achieve that unless we have a completely new mindset about the way we do things. So thank you very much to my panel. I think you were on time. I was the one who spoke too much, so thank you very much. And thank you to the audience. Enjoy the next session and enjoy dinner tonight. So thank you. Sorry about that.